and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We are joined by two very special guests that we will get to here in just a second, and we are going to talk about college football playoff and also realignment and all of the consolidation that's happening around the conferences and kind of what the future holds for the stuff there. But before we get underway, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your name, see your question or comment on the screen so I can respond to it is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. To see your questions on the screen is a little bit of fun, and we get to have a fun back and forth here. But let's get to our guests here. We are joined by two very special guests here. They just actually got off their show, the Andrew Tate Show. We are joined by Andrew Tate and Faith James here. Thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it.
Hello. So this is gonna be different.
Yeah. No, I'm excited. Hopefully it'll go smoother than it did a week ago. If anyone was watching live, we had quite a few problems, but hopefully those are all squared away and we're ready to roll here. But let's talk about conference consolidation, because that's the new thing happening around college football. The SEC and the Big Ten are holding a lot of power in their hands. There's no doubt about that. But I think the way we're going to do this segment in particular is kind of roll through some of the graphics we got. Huge shout out to RecTech on YouTube and also TJ Altimore on X for making these graphics. They're super helpful to figure out what's going on in the college football world right now, because it's kind of hard to visualize when we talk about it, but being able to see it in real time is always very cool. So let's go ahead and jump right in and let's talk about our very first one here, which is the 4 million viewers per the opening for we have a graphic.
I got you covered.
How many games they had 4 million viewers on for each team in each conference. So obviously there is a ton going into this, talking about viewership and how important that is for these teams when we talk about conference realignment and who is attractive to these big time conferences with the SEC and the Big Ten there. Sorry, I was trying to make sure everything was set over on the Zoom side of things, but as you can see, the Big Ten and the SEC are garnering a lot of power here, and it does not change any bit when you look at the viewership and everything. As you can see, the ACC has a couple of teams that are sort of around the same pecking order as the teams in the SEC and the Big Ten. So I'm curious, from y'all's point of view, what kind of stands out to you here, and which teams you kind of see as possible, likely candidates, I suppose, for the SEC and the Big Ten to kind of jump on and take advantage of and take to their own conference.
You want to go first, Faith?
Sure. So first of all, I am very surprised that I figured Florida State would be a lot higher than what it is, honestly. I'm pretty surprised by that. But for Florida State, I feel like their best move would be moving to the Big Ten. That's my personal opinion. And then since the whole thing with Clemson is going on right now as well, don't know if they're really going to be able to get out of the deal with the ACC with how their court case is filed and everything like that. But with Clemson, I think their best move would be to move to the SEC conference. Trying to see Clemson, their numbers. I feel like they would just be a better fit with the SEC. I'm shocked that, they're still in the ACC right now. It just makes more sense, in my personal opinion, for them to be in the SEC. But that's just me. So.
Okay, when I look at this graphic, it is a little bit surprising. I've seen these before, but first off, one thing about the graphics I don't like is they keep putting Notre Dame in the ACC, which kind of throws off the ACC's numbers, because Notre Dame kind of boosts up their numbers. So every time any graphic that you show here, I think needs to be knocked down a little bit when you see some of the big numbers. But the big story is when you look at Florida State is really Wisconsin and, Tennessee. as far as viewership. Not even more like Tennessee or Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
You would have when you hear how much dust they've been kicking up, you'd think they're up there with the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Michigans, and Ohio State. But I've said this before, there's levels to this game. And this is a great example of showing how there's levels to this game. When you look at Ohio State, Michigan, and Alabama, it is impressive. You can even group Georgia, because I know I got two people from Georgia here too, so I don't want to be any disrespectful or anything.
Can't just miss the dog.
So when you look at the Big Four, and then you look around and it's just like, wow, what a big difference. Mm-hmm. Now, commenting on what Faith was saying, Clemson tailor-made for the SEC.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Just tailor-made. Mm-hmm. Yes. Florida State can fit both. One of the things that people do not realize is academics is so important for the Big Ten. And just recently, Florida State became an AAU member, I believe. Florida and Miami are either about to become or have just become AAU members. The academics matter in the Big Ten. And if you don't have that, they won't even consider you. So.
And yeah, I mean, you talk about academics. That's kind of a big part of this that we don't usually talk about when we talk about these sports teams or talk about specifically the football team. But academics are a huge part of this. So why don't we look at kind of the realignment graphic and see where everyone kind of stacks up in all of this. Obviously, you see the Ivy schools are not going to be really touched in this conversation very much. They are obviously towards the top. But you see the Big Ten is right under them. They obviously have a huge emphasis on academics. And when they brought in Nebraska in, I think, 2010, if I'm not mistaken, 2011, they were an AAU school, and that has since been taken away from them. And that is
they're the only school that's not an AAU member in the Big Ten.
Exactly. So that's kind of an interesting issue, and I definitely will play into who they kind of go after. So I'm curious who you guys see as kind of standouts here and how what we just talked about with Clemson and Florida State, how that kind of fits into the narrative. I know Clemson here fits almost too perfectly into the SEC kind of spread that they have here.
You want to say something, Faith, or do you want me to go ahead?
You go ahead.
I'm going to tell you that this is something that kind of surprised me when the Big 12 went under. I was pretty confident that Cal and Stanford would have ended up in the Big Ten. They fit the Big Ten incredibly well. The Big Ten is building out that West Wing, which consists of UCLA, USC, Oregon, Washington. Bringing in the Bay Area, the San Francisco market, I thought was a no-brainer, considering Stanford is considered the Ivy League school of the West. Cal is considered. I mean, Cal and Stanford are massive economic powers, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later on about showing you how much of an economic power it is. But they fit in incredibly well. Now, but if you're talking about the original guys, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, those three schools fit incredibly well. Notre Dame fits like a glove in the Big Ten, but Notre Dame is happy where they're at. Yeah. And so Notre Dame's not going to do anything.
Notre Dame's in a position where they'll get taken kicking and screaming into a conference if they have to, but as of right now, they really have no incentive to.
No, they're making a
discussion, which we'll get to in the next segment, is kind of tailored towards them a little bit with some incentives that they could get to get into the playoffs. So Notre Dame right now is somehow in all of this conference consolidation sitting very pretty where they are.
They don't need to get into a conference. They're making enough money by themselves. Why would they need to join a conference?
NBC's been a huge help to Notre Dame being able to do kind of whatever they want in some circumstances. But we've talked about academics. We've talked about kind of the viewership around these teams. But now let's talk about kind of financials, because obviously that is a huge part of this, and it's something that a lot of us, maybe don't fully understand or just kind of overlook as we go into these conversations. But obviously, you look at the Big Ten, you look at the SEC, they still are the one setting the pace in this one. Obviously, the ACC and the Big Ten or Big 12, excuse me, are definitely struggling to keep that athletic department operating margin above zero, which is a huge thing. Obviously, Rutgers is just remarkably far down there, which I didn't realize. But it really does go to show you just how much money is rolling into these specific programs and kind of different programs than you maybe would have thought. I mean, Indiana leading the way in the Big Ten, obviously a huge basketball school, but when you talk about college football, they don't come up very often. So curious from y'all's perspective if there's any teams, maybe even in the Big 12, that stand out, or I think there are not the Pac-12 teams on here, but those are two other teams that are kind of in this conversation, and we'll talk about them more in the next segment. But are there any teams here that kind of stand out in terms of, being on the wrong side of this than you would expect, or being, on the right side and you didn't expect that?
I'm shocked Alabama's is so low. Like how much money
agree.
they're getting.
That is pretty remarkable. I think
That's insane to me.
everything around that football program has been built around so much of kind of that reloading effort. So I wonder how much money is being put in every year. And
Right.
obviously they're getting insane amounts of money back, but they've started to invest much more in baseball and in basketball over the recent years. So I wonder if that's sort of where that's coming from in the last couple of years at least.
Okay, well, when you look at this, one thing I can tell you, like when you say Alabama's low, they just built out a brand new facility. Their facilities are second to none. I mean, some of their facilities put NFL facilities to shame. Have any of you ever seen it or been there?
No, I have not.
It's absolutely like awe-inspiring. It's amazing what Alabama has done. And little Tuscaloosa, I mean, there's nothing really special about Tuscaloosa, but that university is just white glove top notch. They really do it.
Tuscaloosa people would tell you Alabama football is what's special about Tuscaloosa.
Yes, I would definitely, my family, I have family that grew up in that area. So it's either you go to Auburn or you go to Alabama. You have no other two choices there. But from what I know about college sports, most college football programs, most athletic departments work at a negative budget. When you're saying athletic department, it's not the football that's costing them money. It's those the Olympic sports, those are the ones that really cost a lot of these athletic departments huge dollars. And then when you look around and you notice, Rutgers and the Big Ten operating at a deficit. I don't know why Rutgers is so low. I knew UCLA, they had no choice but to follow USC to the Big Ten.
Yeah,
they were in a massive debt. That has been known for a few years now, that they were operating with massive debt and so needed to make that. But the Big Ten is very different. And there's another slide. I don't know if you're going to show that one where you're talking about like how much money the conferences make. I don't know if you're going to show that or not. But the Big Ten is definitely a very special place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Big Ten is a very specific conference for a number of reasons, but they have so many brands across so many different sports that it kind of gives them the ability to not only be a mainstay in football with Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, but also basketball. You have Indiana, Purdue is becoming incredible, and Michigan State is kind of a blue blood in that game. So you have so much ability in the Big Ten to be kind of that diverse athletic department that they obviously love to bring in. Another reason why I think Florida State kind of fits there is, athletic department that has a lot of different trophies on the shelf, not just football or not just a specific sport, but kind of stretching it out among a number of sports. The one thing that does stand out to me here before we move on to the next segment here is UGA being that far above Texas A&M is quite the gap, I think. And I wonder, we've seen UGA's kind of rise in college football and how they've begun an era of somewhat dominance. And I think they've been putting a lot of money back into that football program. And I wonder if this is kind of the pinnacle of what that number will be, as it looks like they're starting to put more money into basketball, putting more money into into baseball, kind of spreading out the wealth just a little bit more, as some of their other SEC schools have done. As you see, a ton of those Arkansas, Auburn, Alabama have taken big steps forward in basketball over the last couple of years. And you wonder if UGA's margin will start to kind of fall a little bit as those other sports kind of take up more of that cake, I suppose.
Let me tell you this though. This slide is a little deceptive, and the reason why, you look at this slide and you think the Big Ten and the SEC are close, or you look at it, one of the other slides, and you look how much more the SEC is making. It's not close. It's not close. Here's the reason why. I'm going to use Texas, and then I'm going to go to the Big Ten. Texas A&M. Texas A&M makes a lot of money on the research department and their engineering department. So football, like with Georgia, football is a major income potential for them. That's major. Football is different than the Big Ten. Football is what the Big Ten uses to rub shoulders and rub elbows with a lot of the research people. They bring them in for the big games. They bring people in for different events, and it revolves around football. The Big Ten brings in over $9 billion a year in research money. Mm-hmm. A year. That trumps all of their college football money. They make so much money in the research realm that football is just kind of like that investment tool. That's kind of like, hey, I bought this yacht because I want to be able to bring on my executives and rub elbows with them and show them a good time. That's college football is the Big Ten's yacht in the world. Where the SEC, from what I know, that's not the same. They don't bring in that kind of money. No other conference brings in that kind of money. But the Big Ten, they split that money, that $9 billion in research money that comes in a year is massive. And that's the reason why the Big Ten, even though overall the SEC makes a little bit more than the Big Ten athletic department wise, what the Big Ten football program and basketball programs do as far as being a vehicle for getting those research dollars is monstrous. Mm-hmm. And that's if you ever want to know what's the difference between the SEC and the Big Ten, it's the research money. That's the reason why. Go ahead, what's that?
And it'll definitely give you kind of an idea of, if you're looking for certain teams, of where do they fit into the Big Ten. That's one of the places you can definitely look, is obviously that research or that academic money that's coming in, because that is a huge part of what the Big Ten likes to hang their hat on. That's who they are. They're the conference that is not only going to dominate in sports, but also having academics that are above everyone else. So that's kind of their ultimate goal. And you wonder, someone like Florida State, who is making their way up in the academic world, definitely more attractive as they continue down that path. I think there's a number of other teams. North Carolina and Virginia are the two that come to mind most readily. I think North Carolina is a little bit more of an SEC fit, but at the end of the day, if you're looking straight up at academics, I mean, they fit like a glove in the Big Ten. So
North Carolina's at one. It can catch either one. They can go. North Carolina can go either way. That's the reason why I said Virginia. A lot of people don't think about the Big Ten in Virginia, but I do. I think Virginia is a good fit. North Carolina, Miami, and then Stanford and Cal. The unique thing about when you look at this and you start thinking about Florida State or Miami, or even Clemson, the big problem that you run into is the South Carolina Gamecocks do not want Clemson in the SEC. Yeah. Florida does not want Miami or Florida State in the SEC. And that's where the problem lies, right there. I'm very curious to see how that works out.
Yeah, that'll be a really fun thing to watch because, as we know, when we were looking at, the Texas and Oklahoma going into the SEC, A&M was not too keen on Texas joining, and that power wasn't able to be wielded the same way. So it'll be interesting to see kind of the pecking order even within those conferences of who can kind of wield that power to not let them in and who can't. But we will definitely keep talking about this throughout the next couple of weeks. I'm sure the ACC stuff is going to start happening very quickly. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the playoff. We're going to talk about all the stuff happening around there. Obviously, a new revenue deal coming on the table and has a lot of implications. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.